Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football podcast. I'm Joe and I'm joined today by Alex Stewart.
Hello.
And Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hi, Joe.
The three of us are in the room for the first time, I think the first time ever.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not important. Today we're here to talk about Chelsea and what a week it's been for them. Firstly, they lost 4-0 and then they won 5-0. It's almost like you can't predict what's going to happen in football, isn't it?
Is that a direct question?
It's the first question of the podcast.
That's how we begin. With the awkward silence. Yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, I think we should start by talking about the Bournemouth game. Alex and I rewatched parts of that this morning, and it couldn't have been more different, could it? I mean, 4-0, it was the biggest loss in a decade, I think I heard.
Something like that, yeah.
Alex, can you explain? I mean, Seb, you were also at the game, weren't you? I'm going to ask you in a moment, but Alex, can you explain to me what happened?
I think the first thing to say is that Bournemouth defended really, really well and arranged themselves in a very compact two banks of four, which meant Chelsea found it very difficult to play through them. Brooks pressed Jorginho a lot and he particularly seemed to cut quite a frustrated figure. There were a number of occasions where it was clear that he was either looking to receive the ball and it wasn't coming to him, or he was expecting players to make a run off him. Which they didn't do. I also felt that it was noticeable that Hazard particularly, but also Pedro a lot, were cutting inside, and it ended up kind of clustering in the centre. A number of Chelsea players maybe seeking to encourage an overlap, but it congested those areas. And a feature of when Sarri has previously worked well at Napoli was that at least one of those players would stay very wide and create a switch option, try and drag the opposition the other way or make late runs in if they were unguarded, and that wasn't happening either. So it all just ended up being very sterile and quite dull.
Well, Seb, Alex and I watched it on the television, and it seemed an awful lot to us like, the first half at least seemed like a game that Chelsea at some point were probably going to get a goal. It might finish 1-0. Yeah. Was that how you felt being at the game? Was that the sense around the stadium?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I agree with what Alex said in the sense that, yes, Chelsea in that first half, Chelsea dominated territory almost completely. I mean, I don't know what the precise ratio was, but for a large part of it, 21 players were in the Bournemouth half, and then you'd get these sporadic breaks. What I will say is, even from the beginning, Bournemouth looked dangerous on the counter-attack. I think one of the great developments in their football has been from, originally they were just a side who would not quite dominate possession, but who enjoyed being in possession, but who wouldn't necessarily do much with it. They wouldn't move vertically with any great speed or conviction. And now, I mean, it's the fifth Bournemouth game I've been to this season, and all of them have featured this, not quite as spectacularly as this example, but they all featured this capacity to raid and a precision in those counter-attacks. So counter-attacking is fine, but you have to counter-attack with economy. So the idea, for Bournemouth anyway at least, is to advance with as few touches of the ball as possible, because for a team that work under a significant talent disadvantage, which they were against Chelsea of course, and which they would do any time they faced a member of the top six, the idea is to make profit from numerical mismatches, and they did that very well. Chelsea, I mean, I'd seen Chelsea a few weeks before against Newcastle, and they won that game and they scored two very good goals, but it was so unconvincing, because all the same issues were present in their performance that day, in the side-to-side football, the slow pace, the kind of reliance on playing the ball to Eden Hazard or Willian or something like that, and for that player to create the space, rather than, my understanding of Sarri's work at Napoli was that the system creates the advantages, not an individual moment of player. The individual player is a complement to the system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they dominated possession. I think they ended up with about 68% of it. But Artur Boruc made, I think, probably 2 saves in the entire game. One very good one in the first half, but I don't know whether a goal ever felt inevitable, which is a really strange thing to say, and I know I've contradicted myself, but it was as peculiar a game as I think I've been to in years now. It was very, very strange.
Okay. I mean, a lot of the discussion has been around Jorginho, who's a player that Sarri brought with him from Napoli, who is discussed as the key to unlocking the style of Sarri ball at Chelsea. people have been critical of him so far this season. There's been some suggestion that he hasn't adapted to the Premier League, that it's the culture of play that's slightly different here. There's more pressing, it's harder, not enough time to get passes off.
Yeah.
What was your impression of him watching him in the game against Bournemouth?
The same as I thought all season. I think Jorginho is one of many issues. I think some of what people say is true. I think there is a little bit of an adaptation issue and there's an acclimatisation going on. What I'd also say is if you watch Jorginho off the ball, so, when the ball is sort of 20 yards ahead of him or players in a different part of the pitch, you see him trying to organise what's around him. You see him turning to particularly his fullbacks. So Emerson Palmieri, I think, has now been redropped, but he came into the season and it almost looks as if Jorginho is having to coach certain parts of that team through a game. The other issue, obviously, is the midfield ahead of him does not work as it should. I like N'Golo Kante. I think some of the issues he's had have been slightly overstated. For me, Kovacic is too passive to play in the role that he is. He's not a tip of a 3 type of player. He doesn't have the aggression. When he has the ball, his instinct is to recycle it and to move in field or out to a channel. You want someone that isn't afraid to lose it, to actually cut lines. So I don't know. I think Jorginho has become a very convenient scapegoat. I think there are imperfections in this game. I don't think, having watched him, I don't look at him as a player who is obviously struggling. I see him as a player that just lacks the conditions to succeed at the moment. Or at least, I'll put it this way, I don't believe the conditions exist at the moment to definitively judge him. I don't know whether he would play well were they in place, because again, that's an assumption. What I will say is that Chelsea as an entity are not functioning as they should, and that's the problem, really.
Alex, you said he looked frustrated in the Bournemouth game.
Yeah, well, I agree with what Seb's saying about the coaching aspect of things. And I think this is what I meant by saying that these kind of hand gestures of, you should be running there. Why are you not giving me the ball?
Clear frustration.
Massively.
It's not just,
And that's, I think if you compare how Napoli played, and again, I agree with Seb that the system is designed so that the players are subservient to that, and you shouldn't have to rely on individual skill. And there's clearly a disjunct there where you have players like Hazard who are used to being the person who gets the ball and does a thing, whether it's creating space or making a shot or whatever, and he is not playing the same role that Insigne was playing out wide. And I think it's very easy to say, oh, well, you can't just transplant a system from one set of players to another, and yet that is what Sarri has tried to do by and large. And they're lacking that dynamism. And it's the same thing that we talked about when we were talking about Arsenal against Manchester United. It's a kind of, the possession is there, some of the movement is there, but it's not any of it happening quick enough. And Sarri ball, to use the phrase that people do, is about incision of movement. It's about, when possession is recycled, it's recycled deep because there isn't space and the run hasn't happened yet. And that's why occasionally for Napoli, you'd see Koulibaly striding forwards to try and disrupt that press. But for Chelsea, the recycling of possession is happening much further up the pitch because they aren't making the runs, they're not making the movement. And because, as I say, I think that inward movement of both Hazard and Pedro particularly is congesting that central space, and they're finding that they can't get these quick overloads, pass and moves to get into space and then create an option.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about the Huddersfield game then, because obviously since midweek last week, Bournemouth...
Suddenly they were brilliant.
It
was all fine.
I guess the obvious question to ask is that Chelsea or is that Huddersfield? Huddersfield, bottom of the league.
Yeah, just as you have to say that one of the reasons that Chelsea lost against Bournemouth was because Bournemouth were really good and they defended superbly, and exactly like Seb said, they broke brilliantly.
That's almost probably...
it's more of a reason.
Exactly that. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think in this case, this is one of the things that gets really annoying about the narrative of discussing Big Six sides, is that it becomes very easy to say what's going wrong at Chelsea, or is Jorginho a shit player, when actually what you should be saying is, look at the job that Eddie Howe's done at Bournemouth, how well that team were coached in that game, how economical they were in their breaks, how phenomenally good David Brooks was, both offensively and also defensively.
Yeah.
Huddersfield are a woeful side at the moment. They're a side in transition. They've got a new manager in who's going to take a bit of time to adapt. And Chelsea did
they do anything differently? Because one of the criticisms sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's a criticism of Sarri, is that he's tactically inflexible, that he sticks dogmatically to his game plan. I mean, did he do the same thing in both games with a wildly different outcome? Did Chelsea do anything differently?
To my eye, not massively. I think Higuain benefited from being around a little bit longer with the rest of those players, and his link play was more impressive. He was able to work quite well with Hazard, and you do sometimes wonder again. These things are all very systematic. Were part of the issues before that they weren't playing with a centre forward who quite got what was going on, and did that cause players like Hazard and Pedro to feel like the onus was on them to come forward and create and do stuff? I think Barkley is more of a natural fit on the left-hand side of that midfield three for what Sarri's trying to do than Kovacic is.
Yeah.
So there was just a bit more impetus and a bit more speed of thought and execution, but they were playing against the worst side in the Premier League defensively. So, again, it's very difficult to say anything definitive.
Okay, well, last week, Sarri criticised his players. Quite strongly, and it's not a new thing for him to do. I think the English press are already used to it. He described the squad as difficult to motivate, which I think to certain eyes is kind of putting it lightly. It's a criticism we've heard of Chelsea fairly regularly over the past few years. We saw the collapse under Jose Mourinho and then under Conte as well. And I suppose you do have to ask questions about the squad. Worryingly, it looks like there's a potential that Chelsea are going to have a transfer ban for possibly up to 4 windows, maybe as few as 1 if it's similar to Real Madrid, which would mean that if they do stick with Sarri, they're going to have the squad that they have now. Do you foresee problems there, Seb? I mean, where do you fall down between those two opposites? Is Sarri not doing enough? I know these are very binary ways of looking at it. Is there a problem with the squad being motivated?
I don't think anyone can answer the question about motivation other than the players themselves and Sarri's technical stuff. I think where I start with Chelsea is, what did they do before they appointed Sarri? So it's not a secret that Roman Abramovich has coveted a more attractive style of winning for as long as he's been for as long as he's owned the club. But I look at other places where they've imported an ideology. I mean, most locally, obviously, Manchester City. So Pep Guardiola wasn't just transplanted in. There was 5 years of work which went into creating the conditions for him to succeed. The club's entire superstructure was rebuilt to accommodate him. And at Chelsea, I don't see any evidence of that. I see everything continuing as it has done up until this point. So the transfer dynamic is exactly the same. The squad is relatively unchanged. And yet you expect one of the high priests of the game to transform an entire club, whilst only really being allowed to influence maybe 20-25% of it. Literally, the demarcation line is the touchline, and that's it. So that worries me. I think the other thing is when we talk about transfer bans, I think sort of I have to be cynical. Whenever they relate to powerful clubs in the sort of the UEFA sense, I think it's always safe to assume that they're getting suspended and halved, and so I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. But that being said, look, I don't think that squad is good enough. I don't think it's really a question of motivation. I'm not sure it's even necessarily. Is
it not attitude though? I mean, that's the criticism.
It may be,
right?
Joe, but that would be speculation on my part.
Do speculate.
Well, no, because it's. I feel that's quite a. It's quite a banal criticism of Chelsea. It's so easy. Like what's missed in the Mourinho and Conte's examples is that Conte essentially sacked himself. Mourinho sabotaged himself, and Mourinho has been proven to be an extremely difficult man to work with. So I'm loath to criticise the Chelsea players for that. But what I would say is, of the Chelsea 11 who started either against Bournemouth or against Huddersfield, how many of those players are going to get into Manchester City side or Liverpool side or even Tottenham side? Hazard, almost certainly, of course. Maybe Azpilicueta on a good day. Possibly Jorginho, depending on the system around him, and maybe the goalkeeper. But is that an elite squad? I mean, forget what Sarri's supposed to be doing with it. Is the level of quality really good enough to match the level of aspiration? Probably not. So, I think there's a lot of questions. I mean, transfer ban is hugely problematic because you've got a lot to shift, a lot of deadwood to shift there. But also, Hazard remains really the only world-class player in that side.
Why not? You didn't mention Kante. I mean, is that because you don't rate him as that highly attuned, or is it because he wouldn't naturally fit into Guardiola's side?
Truth be told, I forgot to mention him. No. I think he's an excellent player. What I would say though is that in his current incarnation, if we're talking about Kante as a holding midfielder, absolutely, he gets into any of those sides, definitely.
But then the problem is, I would assume, Alex, that he doesn't possess the same forward-thinking passing ability that Fernandinho does. I mean, he wouldn't displace Fernandinho at Manchester City, but is the problem that he's just not the right sort of player to play in these incarnations of teams?
I think he probably could displace Fernandinho. I think he'd take time to settle, but I think one of the things with Kante is that he is good enough to do a lot of these things that we see. The issue with Kante in the Chelsea midfield is not that Kante is suddenly playing really poorly. It's that people feel like he's not being maximised because he's the best player in the world in a particular position. So why aren't you using him in that position? It doesn't mean he's doing what he's being asked to do badly. Far from it.
Does this link into the lack of preparation that Chelsea made?
You know what's interesting. Just before we move away from Alex's point, that Kante thing against Bournemouth is very notable that Eddie Howe quite deliberately said to his players, who'd had 10 days to prepare for the game, so they knew what to expect, and they'd obviously been drilled really, really hard. Kante was allowed the ball in certain situations. What Bournemouth clearly did was say, right, well, we're going to take away Hazard, we're going to take away Pedro, and we're going to take away Higuain. All we're going to do, though, is 25, 30 yards from goal. If you watch it back, I'm pretty sure you'll see him being allowed time on the ball and Bournemouth inviting him to play a pass that he just doesn't have, which is, either a slide rule through the defence, a chip, things with finesse. Kante is I would never say that he is a destroyer, because he's not. He's actually a very, very competent all-round midfielder. He just doesn't have the attacking skills to be a real threat in the final third. Beyond that, he's fantastic. But it's a known weakness that Chelsea are allowing to be exploited. It's a sort of, right, well, Kante cannot hurt you in that situation. Before that game started, against Bournemouth at Dean Court, there's actually the visiting side always do their shooting practice right on the touchline. So you're about 15-20 yards away from it. It's worth going just for that, I have to say. And so watching Chelsea going through their attacking drills, watching N'Golo Kante in those situations, it would be like watching me. It's quite startling how poor he is, how bad his technique is in front of goal. Whereas you compare it to Higuain. Higuain's, I mean, I could have watched that all night. I think it's just a fabulously pure ball striker, amazing. But Kante just has so little instinct. He could learn these things, but he doesn't have the feel for it, the instinct for it. I think it's fair.
But then that role at Napoli, which was done by Alan, he's not that player either.
No.
And the point is, and in terms of Bournemouth being happy to give him possession in certain areas and so on, that all makes sense. But I think the issue there is the balance of the midfield overall, because what Kante will do is give you industry, closing down, a spare option, keep the ball moving.
Someone who is very comfortable receiving the ball will show for it again and again.
And that was what Alan did for that Napoli team. And if you're seeking to replicate that, which Sarri clearly is to a degree, the missing part of that jigsaw is the third element
in front of them. That's the thing, because I think that I always saw Alan as a slightly better technical player. I do agree, but I mean, I think the problems in that midfield do start and end with the third player. Because
is it the hamshake role?
This is the thing.
Insofar as if you looked at the Napoli sides that he coached, then it's the one who plays on the left in a more attacking way. So
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a Hamsik clone.
No.
It just has to be a player that embodies many of this. It's almost attitude. It's almost a kind of, why am I in the team and what is my role as a sort of, as the link point between the attacking three and the midfield. What is my duty with the ball? Is it just to shovel it around? And I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but almost to pass responsibility to someone else, because that is really what Kovacic does. Barkley less so. There are a different set of issues which come with Ross Barkley. I think we all recognise that he's not going to be the player he was predicted to be 5 years ago. But that he represents something which is closer to the ideal, which is aggression. You know, the main criticism of Barkley has always been this sort of almost thoughtlessness and recklessness with the ball. Actually, that's what you need. A player that isn't afraid to put it in harm's way. A player that doesn't go through a game with one eye on his completion percentage.
A Paul Pogba.
Potentially, but not in the role he plays for Manchester United, but like a player
that's definitely close to it.
It's definitely close to it. It's almost a player that wants that burden. It's intangible, so it's very difficult to describe. But
that intangible is an interesting thing with Hamsik, because Hamsik is Mr. Napoli.
Yeah.
Like he's been at that club forever. I think their leading goal scorer now.
Yeah.
Did he not just leave in January? Didn't he?
No, he wants to.
Oh, he wants to.
Yeah.
Possibly because Sarri's gone as well. But he was, again, with that Napoli side, everyone was like, oh, well, Jorginho's who makes it tick. And that's kind of true. But if he's the thing that makes it tick, Hamsik was the thing that gave it the energy, that gave it the dynamism.
Well, we were talking about this before
Yeah.
we recorded the podcast. You were taking a look at players who might be similar to Marek Hamsik, who could fit in for Chelsea, for example. And I mean, the result was quite interesting, wasn't it? Because there were no obvious candidates. Now, it might be worthwhile explaining how you went around doing this.
Yeah, so we've got access to a few sort of scouting type tools that are quite helpful, and you can pull up a player and assess elements of what they do and weight the importance of those things. One of the interesting things to look at Hamsik is that actually, from a kind of numbers point of view, performance-wise, he's not dissimilar to Jorginho. Actually, a lot of what he does is quite similar, but he's doing it further up the pitch, and he is doing it more aggressively. But I mean, some of the names that came up from this season, because last season there are other players as well, but Gundogan. David Alaba, oddly enough, but he
actually that doesn't surprise me.
No, I mean, he's kind of probably the best left back in the world now.
He's almost, if ever such a thing exists, it's left back with a free role.
Yeah,
almost. It's bizarre.
Did you see the thing the other day about a false fullback?
Yeah. I guess that's really what I'm saying. But I mean, I wouldn't describe it that way.
I could sort of imagine what a false fullback ought to be, but I just don't see why you'd call it that.
Someone that spent a bit too much time behind the laptop.
Yeah, I think possibly so.
Yeah.
Harry Winks is up there as well. Eriksen, Pjanic. So, this is looking at measurable metrics. It's looking at how much you contribute to XG build-up, how much you contribute in terms of, aggressive passes from a deep position, that kind of stuff. I think, Seb and I were talking about this before we started recording, the difficulty is that numbers will only take you so far in terms of player assessment, and what you then need to do is look at how they fit into what's going on, look at how they play, how they carry themselves, what else they bring, even to the intangibles of personality, which for Hamsik is really important. He was the leader of that team, no question at all. So it would be tricky to say that there is an obvious replacement for that kind of, there are players who, like we talked about with Fernandinho, there are players who just seem to inhabit a role and a function and a set of abilities that are uniquely suited to a team in a given season. And that can be impossible to replicate.
Yeah. And presumably often those are mental or psychological attributes as well that lend them towards those sorts of... towards that sort of uniqueness.
I think that's probably true. And you also, Sarri came in and did well pretty much from the off at Napoli. But I think, and this is interesting in terms of any potential transfer ban, is that wasn't a squad with a huge amount of churn in terms of players coming in. They were players who benefited significantly from repeatedly being coached how to play this system. So it is entirely plausible that if Sarri is given time, that next season they'll be phenomenal in a way that, say, Conte in his second season. Once Conte had made the shift to the 3-4-3, it caught everybody on the hop. No one was used to doing it. It was great. He won. The next season, he basically played exactly the same way, by which time everyone's figured out what to do. I think with Sarri ball at its best, it's still really hard to stop, even if people know what's going to come. Okay. So those players may develop, they may grow into it, and buying in isn't necessarily the answer.
And Seb, presumably he's going to be given more time. I mean, I know it's Chelsea and their manager turnover is fairly high, but it's what? I mean, how many months since he took the job?
Well, we this came up in the press room after the Bournemouth game, just as a sort of, this is not the kind of, I think it was Chelsea's worst result in the Premier League since '97. I want to say that might not be correct, but something like that. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to someone who covers the club, one of the club-specific guys working in the game, and he said, no, there's no appetite to dismiss him at the moment. So, I'm not in a place to contradict that. This person knows better than I do.
Well, let's talk about the appetite, because it's we shouldn't ignore movements off the field as well. Yeah. I mean, there's the story that allegedly Roman Abramovich wants to sell Chelsea. Mm-hmm. We covered that on the Tifo Football YouTube channel.
It's a brilliant video by James Montague, that, yeah.
Would you be able to sort of briefly recap for us the situation with him?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, I would direct people to the video, because it's a very fine piece of work by James.
Including rubber ducks.
But it almost has its genesis in what did or did not happen in Salisbury last year, which is obviously still contested. But the consequence of it is that Roman Abramovich is no longer allowed to work in this country. He's allowed to stay in this country for, I think, 6-month period.
6 months, yeah.
But he's had his... there was a delay in renewing his investor visa, which, when that occurred, he withdrew his application. So he is now an Israeli citizen, I think. And as a result, I mean, there are other factors here. Look, Abramovich's personal situation is obviously hugely important, but they're unable to press forward with the ambition to build a new stadium, which over time will put Chelsea at a very significant disadvantage. I mean, at the time that was attributed to a poor investor climate, and obviously let's not go down a Brexit route on this podcast. I don't think we need to do that, but we all understand what that means. And so, by all accounts, yes, just very fair. So, yeah, there is a suggestion that Chelsea are up for sale. It's being, by all accounts, according to James's video, I'll have that little disclaimer in there. The sale is being handled by an American company, and he wants a cool £3 billion for his ownership.
Which James said would make it the most valuable or the most highly valued sports organisation of all time.
It would. It's
a slightly.
That's the thing. Yeah. It's a slightly misleading. I mean, you wouldn't say, for instance, that that sale, because how often do the New York Yankees go up for sale, the Dallas Cowboys, Manchester United, that kind of stuff. So I would stay clear of that. But yes, obviously a hugely valuable sports property.
Okay, and I would assume that these sorts of rumblings have a knock-on effect, right? I mean, they do. It's inevitable in some ways, and we see it with other clubs as well. But to your understanding, what involvement has Roman Abramovich really had over what degree of involvement? I mean, beyond picking the managers and then deciding when they go.
Right. We looking at it from a purely sporting perspective.
Yeah. I mean, like, what effect might this going on in the background have on the football club itself, the football side of it? I mean, it could be nothing, but...
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of Abramovich's day-to-day power has been devolved to Marina Granovskaya, who's his chief executive. Marina Granovskaya is a hugely capable woman who started as Abramovich's PA for his gas company. Nice. Before it was absorbed by Gazprom. She is in charge of the day-to-day operations of the club. She is in charge of transfer activity. So I think the question is less...
That's the dream, isn't it?
This is the thing, because I mean, she was actually she led the agreement with Nike for their kit sponsorship and stuff. So she has done tremendous good at Chelsea. Yeah. I think the question of, and I got to be careful how I phrase this, because when you say someone's very, very capable, that doesn't preclude you from saying that, are they really the best person to be leading a club's transfer strategy?
This is sounding very Ed Woodward.
But it's the same question, Alex, because it's the difference between being a very capable business person.
Oh, for sure. No, I'm
gearing up for my monologue.
Don't get in his way.
I don't trust business people to make transfer decisions, and this is not a proper football man argument. It is you need a specialist argument. And if you look at Chelsea's transfer activity over the last few seasons, forgetting what funds are available, because Chelsea are not Manchester City. The world has changed. They're not Paris Saint-Germain. They are, it's almost like the old Mike Ashley excuse. I'm just a humble billionaire, which staggeringly is not actually enough in football anymore, just to be that wealthy. I don't know. I mean, to me, there is a huge void at Chelsea between the manager and the chief executive, which should always be filled by a sporting director. Michael Manalo has gone to Monaco, has not been replaced, and so by all accounts, I mean, I don't know what Alex thinks about this. I mean, using the Christian Pulisic situation as an example, Pulisic is a good player, maybe one who gets a little more attention than he's due on account of the novelty of his nationality, in my opinion. Like he's a very good player, but it's quite rare to have a player playing at that level who is also an American. That makes him more interesting. Do I think he is...
Makes him more valuable.
It certainly makes him more valuable. It certainly makes him an easier transfer to rationalise. I understand that completely. But I remember hearing Sarri's reaction to that, saying, oh yeah, a month ago they asked me whether I like him, and I said, yeah, he's great. And then the day before they told me the transfer had been completed, and that's also good news. And I thought, what a strange situation, because you have this guy with this incredibly specific way of playing the game, and someone who is really the only person best placed to advise as to what he needs to enact that strategy.
Who you've welcomed in and you're looking forward to him implementing his style.
Exactly that. You want what he represents, and yet this isn't a 10 million. This isn't a player who is there to feather the financial fair play nest. He's not going out on loan for 9 seasons to gradually appreciate and then be sold. Here's a guy who is coming in to play on the side. And I'm not saying we should return to days of managerial autonomy over transfer strategy, rednapism, for want of a better expression, where it's, I fancy that guy, I like him.
There be demons.
He can play, right, because that's an outmoded, the game's too valuable, transfers cost too much, you can't have that anymore. But for Sarri not to be more involved in that process, for him not to, I don't know, go and spend some time with Christian Pulisic, go and get to know his intellectual attributes as well, because a lot of this is a lot of his success, if Sarri is still there next year, a lot of it's going to depend on how well Pulisic assimilates himself to these demands. I mean, the red flag, of course, is that at Dortmund he has suffered injury this season, but Jadon Sancho has already trusted more than him. He has surpassed him in the little hierarchy there. So I just find that very strange, and until what Abramovich's role is, I don't know. But in this deferral of power, you've created a situation where maybe the club is running itself on 2 different fronts. Sarri is being tasked to build a football team. Marina Granovskaya is being tasked with building a financially viable enterprise, which she is doing fantastically well by all accounts. But it's not the same thing. And I have a difficult time with that. I mean, there's always room for things to be done differently in football. I accept that, but the model of fostering ideology within your own club seems to exist in one way. There's one route to doing it, the Manchester City route, basically, and it's not really happening at Chelsea. And so I'm yet really to hear a plausible explanation for why.
Yeah.
So I can't really answer the question. I can talk a lot about it, but this is part of the problem. People don't understand that dynamic. And I think anyone that claims to is, well, wrong. I don't... Why does it work this way at Chelsea? Why, on the one hand...
Seems nonsensical.
Well, why on the one hand does Abramovich have this naked desire to be Barcelona-like? Okay, under a different guise, but that's what he wants. He wants his football team to be associated with a particular quality.
But he hired Jose Mourinho twice, and he hired Conte.
Yeah. It's just the whole thing is a contradiction. It's very, very strange. So
I mean, even the way that Di Matteo won the Champions League with them in 2012 was not that style of football.
Well,
I mean, it was totally.
I don't think it was a style of football. I mean, I think it's terribly unfair, perhaps, but I detached Roberto Di Matteo almost entirely from that success because his quality in that.
You put it down to John Terry.
I wouldn't go that far. I would say it's more of a Didier Drogba, Frank Lampard, Peter Cech thing. But I would say Roberto Di Matteo was as relevant to that as Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is to Manchester United's form at the moment. We don't know. It's very, very hard to tell.
Hard to tell.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, let's go to some questions from listeners now. Thank you so much. We have so many questions. I'm not going to be able to get to them all because there's about 200. But here's a couple of
some of
good
them
ones.
are rubbish, probably.
Some of them are absolutely terrible.
Some of them are quite offensive. Yeah. not to us.
No,
But,
it's okay. It's fine. You roughed me up. I'll take some.
no, I didn't. Yeah, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Trust me. I've read them.
Here's 2 questions from Manas, and I'm going to let you choose which one to answer because we haven't got time for both. The first one is that why is it that Chelsea, the under-18s and the under-21s are so successful, yet they do not receive the appropriate amount of playing time at a higher level? And the other question you can choose to answer is Chelsea always seem to find themselves in a state of turmoil after a successful year. What's this about? Is it because of complacency? Which one would you like?
You choose.
Well, I think we do. I think we should answer the first one because we've sort of touched quite enough on the second already through various other discussion
seems
points.
Good justification.
It's probably because, actually, in relation to what Seb's just been saying, all of which I agree with, and I do find the way that football clubs are run both perplexing and fascinating. And that's something that we should probably do a whole podcast on at some point because it's a really interesting subject.
A new site on that, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Tifo dysfunction.
Yeah, well, that's just the office. But it's short-termism. You know, if you are going to take a risk on younger players in the fiercely competitive environment of the Premier League where finishing 4th or above is literally everything. I mean, Chelsea are never going to get relegated, so that's not something to consider. But, you know, it's not like the Bundesliga or Liga where, you know, you can afford to blood younger players, where at Dortmund you make an actual thing of it. And it is worth noting that Mislintat is out of work and Chelsea could do a lot worse than to hire him. But also at Dortmund he works with Michael Zorc, who is a genius in his role as a former player, which is really interesting. So I think that's probably by and large what it is. You know, Chelsea kind of almost reflexively, in the same way that, you know, when I take the dog for a walk I have to have a cigarette, acquire young players. They can't help buying young players.
They also make quite a lot of money from that system.
That's
as well,
true, but I think they've just got so used to it. There's like a conveyor belt. It wouldn't surprise me if it were almost the case of the academy scouts are out there, and every, you know, once a month a bill passes over Granitskaya's desk saying, like, it's another 2.5 million for player tribunals. Yep, tick, done.
Abramovich could sell the club and they might not even notice.
It's quite possible.
They're still in the youth bunker.
The academy is functioning so perfectly that it, you know,
it requires no intervention.
It's like a footballing cockroach.
This Chelsea Academy thing, like I think it's about to become far more interesting than it ever has done, because up until this point, I know Chelsea's use of youth players has been a thing for a really long time, but in hindsight, how many of those players have actually been good enough to warrant a first team opportunity?
We don't know, do we?
Well,
that's
but
because they don't get the first team opportunity.
Do you mean at other clubs?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some cases, Alex is right. In others, I look at someone like, for instance, Lewis Baker. Lewis Baker, I remember people saying, "Oh, this guy's going to be a Premier League standard number 10 in the future, or an 8 or something," and he's like, "Well, no, he's not." I think that's fairly clear now.
But then, not to interrupt you, but they said that about Jose Baxter as well, and he's now shilling at Oldham. So that's not necessarily a function of not being afforded first team opportunities. It's that players. I mean, you said it about Ross Barkley just earlier.
Yeah,
like a lot of players just aren't as good as people think they will be.
But this is my point.
And that doesn't mean that
they've been allowed to become some of these players. They've become part of the cause. So fans will gravitate. Every fan is the same. This isn't a characteristic unique to Chelsea supporters. Every fan thinks that their academy has a star in it, because that's part of that's the aspiration of being a supporter. That's just the way it is.
Sure.
I think what makes it interesting now is that you've got players who quite obviously are a level above what they've produced in the past. I would say Callum Hudson-Odoi is a few levels above anything I've seen in that position for some time. Mason Mount is potentially an outstanding footballer who will play for England probably before the end of this season. If
Is Hudson-Odoi better than Sancho? I mean, I declare I have not watched.
In both cases, you know what's interesting? At youth level, Sancho really jumped out as a player in a way that Hudson-Odoi didn't.
Right.
So they've had different stages of growth. So Hudson-Odoi of the last year has accelerated as a player into something that I don't think many foresaw. Sancho, even playing as a under 17 England player, he just looked. There were imperfections in his game which have been chiselled away far quicker than most people would have thought. But I don't think there'll be much between them in the next couple of years. And so you have, and there's an excellent fullback playing for someone who I forget. Did I tap the table again?
You tapped the table, Sam.
But you know that I do this when I get passionate about something. I start the first. You could see his eyes the first time I came in, Alex. He was they're burning through me. I think you know the trouble is that if these players, someone like Hudson-Odoi, if Hudson-Odoi is not seen to get a sustained opportunity at Chelsea, or worse, he's seen to become a prisoner of his own contract and then denied a dream move to Bayern Munich. It creates a very difficult situation for Chelsea's recruiting staff in the future.
Yeah, that's sour. Yeah.
It's very difficult because there's I think the popular line is, well, these players are wising up. Yes, I'm sure they are, looking at sort of Jadon Sancho and seeing what he's been able to achieve. But their parents and representatives are too, and they're seeing that actually, the appeal of a 3, 4, 5 year contract on good money, on excellent money for a teenager, is a little bit of a false reality sometimes, given what you could be able to achieve if you went to a slightly lesser academy and worked your way up the game, because the game is becoming a little bit more
egalitarian.
A little bit. It is actually. I mean, look at David Brooks.
It's Tamori at Derby County, isn't it?
Tamori's at Derby. That's not the one I meant, though. He's a fullback who plays for someone like. It's not Dujan Sterling at Coventry. Good player though he is. It's not Jay Da Silva at Bristol City. It's somebody else. I was reading this on the train, so forgive me. I will.
It's definitely not Baba Rahman.
It's sadly not him. No. It's not Michael Hector either.
Well, listen. Let me interject with a question along these lines from Andrew Yan. Do you think that the club should get rid of deadwood players and focus on youth? Because, I mean, let's just hypothetically say that they do incur a transfer ban, even for as little as one window. We know that there are difficulties within the squad already. We know that, as you just mentioned, there are a list of young Chelsea players who are a cut above what they've been in previous seasons. If you were the manager, Sam?
No, I would never become wholly reliant on an academy, because a youth player's development is full of all kinds of pitfalls. Like, you can look at a player at 16... and we've all done this. You fall in love with them. You're seduced by their technique and their ability and their, how they command the game at that level. And Ravel Morrison's a good example. Marcus Edwards, Tottenham's Marcus Edwards on loan at Excelsior is an excellent example of someone who ran games as a 16-year-old.
Harrison Reed,
Johnny Williams. Remember Johnny?
I do.
Harrison Reed was excellent.
Harrison Reed, I want to say, is in the Championship now.
Somewhere.
I remember seeing him and thinking. I remember seeing him at the time Southampton bought Geordie Classy, and thinking that's weird.
Because you've got Harrison Reed.
Exactly that.
I really rated him.
Sorry to interrupt. No. Nice little flashbacks to
Harrison
Reed days. But I think the point is you can never take a youth development is a very low percentage enterprise. So you always have to combine the two. Like, even the clubs where there are clear pathways. Say, for instance, Tottenham. Okay, you may play an Oliver Skipp, but part of playing him is actually finding out whether he's really going to be good enough. You can't know. No one knows this. Like, Oliver Skipp looks like a good player, and you can sit in the stands and think, wow, in 2 or 3 years, once he's developed this, and he's learned a little bit about that, and he's played in the Bernabeu or something like that. But this is imprecise. This is not. It's not. That doesn't come with the kind of reassurance that football clubs need in their long-term planning.
It's exactly the same as stepping up to international level. Because
don't know.
People always say whatever the international sport is, that everything happens just that beat or two faster.
Michael Ricketts.
And there can be players who are excellent players at club level, and they try and make that transition, and for whatever reason it just doesn't work. And it's the same,
exactly.
It's a similar kind of step change between those levels, and the physicality, the pace, all of those things. That physicality and pace are not in and of themselves a challenge. It's the lack of time you get to think about stuff under those circumstances.
Yeah, with also do you have the emotional tools to deal with playing for your country? That's a big one in this country, for example. And it's the same, go division by division. Can you cope with, not being an academy star, but being a single component within a Premier League team? Some players can't. Like, Joe has his hand up.
You're not supposed to say.
No, but this is
Joe wants to move.
This is behind the curtain.
You're lucky he didn't interrupt you, because normally he just surges in there. And
mate,
I did that deliberately. So for those who couldn't see that, I knocked his.
Someone sent Alex a Twitter DM
they did.
the other day, which Alex loved because it confirms all of his conspiracies. Which said that I really love your takes on the Tifo Football podcast.
Thank you.
I wish that fat oaf would stop interrupting you.
Definitely didn't call you fat.
But he did say I was interrupting. Which is just to be clear, right? And this is we're settling inside disputes here. But if I ever move you on, it's because you've been talking for too long and it's boring.
The first time I did an illustrated game with Joe,
oh god,
like my mother,
which is a podcast that we all used to do years ago.
We used to do a long time ago. So my mother doesn't really know an awful lot about football, but just she listens to the stuff that I do. Yeah. And she phoned me up after that one, and she was like, "Oh, I thought you dealt with him very, very well." That dreadful man.
I know. I just spiked like a motherfucker there.
I am much kinder on this in this incarnation of the podcast.
He used to it was his own sort of fiefdom.
It was
illustrated game, wasn't it? It was.
I remember turning up outside that little house in Walthamstow and smoking on the street until I was exactly on time because I'd arrived early, and Joe just thinking it was the weirdest thing he'd ever encountered.
If anything, polite.
Yeah, I thought so.
I thought it was weird, and I mocked you instantly about it.
Yep,
even though I didn't know you. Tadej, this isn't actually a real name, so there's no point in me saying it properly. Oh god, if it is now, I'm sorry.
Do you know I got a DM the other day from Sexual Predator?
Sorry, for anyone who didn't listen to last week's podcast, Sexual Predator asked a question, and we answered it and then discussed his name. And then I regret bringing it up, and I regret you bringing it up again now.
And he's
we really need to stop saying Sexual Predator.
He signed it like Sexual Predator.
I just got so confused. I really want to. Never mind.
Move on.
Tadej Quinn, is Hazard a leader?
No.
Not for my money.
Easily done. Okay.
By example, to a degree, he and it's funny when we were talking about the hamshake role. Hazard has all of those things. Yeah. He has that incision carrying the ball. He has the desire to get on it and do stuff. And maybe the Pulisic thing will work out because you could see Hazard playing that slightly deeper role, particularly if Kante is able to absorb the defensive work.
If Hazard stays beyond the summer. I mean, it's hard. I look at his age and I think, do you want to win a European Cup? Because I don't think you're going to do it.
You're not going to do it at Chelsea.
No. I mean, and also he's, I'm not doing this to provoke Chelsea fans, but I think he's entitled to that move. Like he belongs. He's a truly world-class player. He has been very loyal to Chelsea he's been there since I think 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Someone will look that up for me.
Yeah.
And he
is this. Do you think players are entitled to move to places because they've demonstrated a degree of loyalty? They should be allowed there
under certain
in the sun or something.
Under certain situations. I mean, I said about Hazard because I look at sort of the pieces that have been put around him at Chelsea, and I wonder whether they've really done enough.
Yeah.
Because they've been relying on him for so long that you forget that. Okay, so he's the leading light within that forward line. And how many other players, not necessarily of his exact standard, but of a similar standard, have been put around him to carry the burden, to share the burden? I mean, Pedro's a good player, Willian's a good player, Giroud and Morata, okay, they're good players. But where has been the sort of where is his motivation to stay there? If you can't, he's won the Premier League already, he's won the FA Cup already, he's not probably going to win a Champions League there. I mean, he's 28. So he's probably got 2 more years of his prime at estimate. Maybe a little bit less because he does get kicked around the pitch in England. I think it's kind of he belongs. It's not about whether he belongs at that club or another. It's at what level of the game does he belong?
Yeah.
And at the moment, he's playing for a club who are in the Europa League. So it doesn't, it's the same argument as, should Gareth Bale have been playing for Tottenham? No, he deserves a move to Real Madrid. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Hazard could have probably left several times already now. And so it wouldn't surprise me. I'd like to see him stay because the Premier League is stronger for players like that. And I want to be able to see them every week. That's great. But I would understand it. That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, no, that's very reasonable.
Yvonne Okafor, who is a Tifo Football YouTube channel member, which incidentally you can also become should you wish to sign up and support our ongoings here at Tifo Football. Thank you. Yvonne Okafor...
It's very creepy when he does that.
Yeah. I know, it was a little bit at the end, wasn't it? Yvonne Okafor makes the comment that Sarri's criticism of his players was discussed more and criticised in itself more than Unai Emery's criticism of Arsenal players at Arsenal. Would either of you like to imagine why those scenarios might be different in the press?
I mean no disrespect, but it's just not. There's no agenda. It's not deliberate. It's just what's more newsworthy.
Well, that's. I don't think Yvonne is suggesting
I'm sure
there's a deliberate agenda. But I mean, what are the reasons why it's more newsworthy? Because it's Chelsea.
Well, no, because Chelsea are expected to be better than they are.
Right.
Arsenal are acknowledged to be in a transitional period.
When have Arsenal not been in a transitional
period? Well, this is the thing. This is like Arsenal. Did anyone think that Arsenal would be anything more than they are at the moment? Probably not. Whereas Chelsea started the season very well. Their fans were promised for the fans that weren't familiar with Napoli were promised a sort of an exhilarating style of football, which hasn't been implanted properly. It's newsworthy. Arsenal not being very good. Arsenal losing away to Manchester City. It's tired as a storyline.
Okay, we've danced around this already. I'm going to ask you this because I actually had it written down anyway, and it's a more specific version of something we've already discussed. So do feel free to tread over old things. This is from Phil Malin. Will Sarri ball work under the increased pace of the Premier League when man-marking Jorginho and pressing seems to negate the passing fluidity? I mean, the specific part of this, I suppose, and it's something that's come up in the comment section quite a lot, and it's a common criticism of Jorginho, is that if you mark him out of the game, the rest of the system doesn't work. We've talked about the idea that Sarri's system requires everyone, doesn't rely on one player, but in a sense, if you knock one of those cogs out, the whole thing kind of collapses. Is that fair? And is that the case for Jorginho?
It's a way of negating some of Chelsea's strength, and there is one thing that we didn't mention earlier when we were contrasting Bournemouth and Huddersfield, and that was that Andreas Christensen played instead of Rudiger, and is a better passer of the ball from deep. So, if you're a top level team with top level players, they should be able to make an adjustment. Mm-hmm. If you close down one option, that shouldn't suffocate the entire team. And I think it does suggest that the rest of the team isn't quite as up to speed on how that system should work. And so, nullifying one player can have that effect. But, as Kante improves in terms of giving Jorginho passing options out of cover shadow, as someone like Christensen, who I think should have been playing a lot more than he has, as he comes in and gives that second option. If they do bring in a centre-back like Koulibaly, who can bring the ball out and disrupt that press a little bit more. The issue is not simply that you press and man-mark Jorginho. It's what are the other players doing around that in order to either mitigate the fact that your main playmaker isn't able to receive the ball, or to drag other players around. And Bournemouth, part of the reason Bournemouth could defend solidly in two banks of four was because Chelsea weren't moving around enough to disrupt that. So it's kind of, it swings and roundabouts. It's not just his fault. There should be other ways of either bringing him into the game more and disrupting what the opposition are doing with their press, or Chelsea having more options. And that will change, that will improve over time.
Okay, and the final question from IK Gamer. Do you think Loftus-Cheek has a chance at Chelsea?
No, not really. I don't think he's good enough. I think he's a good player and he has a sort of mid-level Premier League future, but I don't think he's...
Would you not give him a run out in the left the left of midfield position just to see how he does.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not convinced that. I think he's also a little bit passive. I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure any of us have actually seen quite enough of him to know. But
he was very incisive at the World Cup.
See, that's what sticks out to me is the fact that he was quite a dynamic player.
He really made a difference
in that area in the World Cup. Yeah,
and I want to think yes. I just don't. I mean, I'm tempted to believe that I've kind of tricked myself into thinking he's a better player than he really is. I think he had a very good season at Palace, but he played slightly deeper there at times. I mean, he did play as a number 10 periodically, but he played in a range of midfield
kind
positions.
of played as an 11.
Occasionally, but with those with Zaha and Townsend ahead of him as well.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of being nominally in a midfield line, but kind of pushing forwards and inside. You know, that you can't be a passive player and occupy that position. Otherwise, he would have been playing as a 6 or an 8.
You can't. I don't know whether. Look, I think what it would take for him to succeed at Chelsea is for someone to say, right, well, you're going to get 10 games guaranteed in this position, and I just don't see that happening.
I wish it did, though, and I don't. I'm not saying this about Chelsea generally. I just I almost wish that there was less of a financial imperative, less of a short-termism, that players that look like they might be interesting were given the time to breathe and develop without it mattering quite so much.
I completely agree, but I think this might happen at Chelsea. I just don't think it will happen with him. I think the next player that they will probably sort of indulge to that level is probably Mount, just because he's worth it.
Where does he fit in?
I think his future is as a 10.
Right.
So whether that really fits into what Sarri's doing at the moment, probably not. But I think he's the kind of player. I'm not going to sort of burden him with a term like generational talent, but he's, you know, he takes.
But he is
a generation
of this era.
I think he's got pretty much at the moment pretty much every attribute you'd want to see in him. I'll put it that way. I'd be stunned if he doesn't become a first team regular at Chelsea.
Yeah.
And I think you know even clubs like Chelsea they chart where their youth pieces are and who's worth giving the time to. I think Loftus-Cheek's opportunity is probably already passed.
Yeah.
That's not to say he isn't a good player who would fit in very nicely at somewhere like Everton, for instance. Although there are I wouldn't wish Everton on any player at the moment.
Thing to say.
But it's a his range is probably between about 8th and 12th in the league. I'd have thought. Good player, just not a special one.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps us up for today's podcast. So thank you to everyone for listening and for all the listeners' questions as well. I'm sorry that we only asked about 4 of them, but they were good. They were good questions, weren't they? Yeah. Alex, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Seb,
thank you, Joe.
We'll see you again soon.
Yes.
Oh, incidentally, are you going to do any more of your interviewee podcasts?
Yeah, we've got a few coming up. We unfortunately, Great Western Railways sabotaged our Peter Drury interview. But we will be doing that probably next week. We've also got
definitely didn't sabotage.
They did. It was personal. It was 5. Had I actually arrived in time to do that, I would have just. I would have left Peter sitting there, and we'd have just had one angry hour-long monologue. We've got one scheduled with an American author who's written a range of really, really good biographies with figures from American sport. And at some point, we're going to have Nick Miller in to talk about freelancing life.
Lovely.
So that should be interesting. And Daniel Story, it's not quite up on the website yet, but obviously I've read and reviewed Dan's latest book, 250 Days, Eric Cantona's Kung Fu Kick, and the impact on Manchester United. So we're gonna chat to Dan at some point. We haven't scheduled that one yet, but yeah.
Okay,
subject
great.
to availability.
You will be able to find that article when it is released, and all of Seb's writing, well, not all of it, but quite a lot of it, at tifofootball.com. Incidentally, if you would like to, I already mentioned this, but if you'd like to become a Tifo Football YouTube channel member, that would be lovely. You can help support us by giving a little bit of your money that you worked very hard to earn.
Geldof ever,
giving it to us. Give us your money. Please give it to us. That'd be lovely.
You should put little kind of shaky coin noise.
Shaky coin noise
in post-production.
All I'm saying is that I would like your money, and I would like to have it. But no, you can support us by doing that. You also get access to various cool little bonuses. In fact, the video version of the podcast used to be one of those, and now it's on the public channel because the members they didn't want it enough. They didn't want it enough.
They wanted something else.
They wanted something else. Alex, what are we doing for them now? Give us you do your Geldof.
Okay, so what we're going to do is basically answer tactical questions on a weekly basis with a little video. Obviously, on our main channel, we do the big tactical teams. We do, your Man U's and your Arsenals and all that. This is the opportunity for members to get in touch and ask literally anything that they want an explanation of tactically.
It's much more informal as well. It's
much more informal. Me in front of
Who
the
are you
camera.
doing this week?
Montreal Impact.
I mean, great.
Under Remy Gard.
And that's because I can't. I'm sorry, I didn't write down the name of the person who asked for that. But one of our members did.
Yeah, and you will get name checked when we do the video. But it's basically, if you want to know...
How much time did you spend researching for that?
Montreal Impact?
Yeah.
I watched about 4.5 hours worth over the weekend.
Okay, right. So there you go. If you become a Tifo Football YouTube channel member...
demands payment.
It does.
Right.
It does.
You get so much internet for free. Start paying for it.
Right, exactly. But this is the chance to, if it's a player that maybe your team's going to sign possibly and you'd like to know more about them, if it's a manager, if it's... through Y-Scout particularly, we have access to pretty much any game anywhere. So be as literally as obscure as you like.
Yeah, Alex would like it
I
if you
will
were
enjoy that.
Yeah.
More
I
obscure.
can't be bothered to do another Manchester United video.
Yeah. But if you would like to join...
But what is Alexis Sanchez's best position?
Walking his dogs.
Easy does it. You can click the join button underneath any of our YouTube videos. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back next week. I think we're talking about Watford. And I'm looking at you.
I haven't got a fucking clue.
No, okay.
I don't know why you're asking me. Are we just going down the table in order?
I think we're talking about Watford.
Cool. Let's talk
Interesting,
about Watford
Watford,
then.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, right, brilliant. Thank you very much, and we'll speak to you soon.